call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. First order of business today is the minutes dated December 17th. Is there a motion to approve? Been a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minutes approved. On our regular agenda today, before we get to that, I'm just going to make a comment, and we'll discuss this at the end of the regular agenda. It's a letter that we have from Barron's Vista that they're withdrawing a request, and they're going to come back at a later time with a new request for their project. So, but we will add that as our fifth item on our regular agenda when we get there.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, from yesterday, we were going to add another item for discussion, and that was going to be the discussion of the West Dickinson, of the West Dickinson study and plan.
So we'll add a sixth item, and that will be the West Area Dickinson plan that we had a joint meeting yesterday with City Commission on. So our first item today on our regular agenda is a preliminary plat. It's to consider a request for a minor subdivision plat for the Rindale subdivision. The site is generally located in the northeast quarter of Section 14, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. The site's approximately 5 acres, and at this time I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward and let us know what you want to do.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Quentin Obergewich, the surveyor on this subdivision plot that we're requesting. Basically, it's going to be a one-lot subdivision for one person to construct a home on. There are no future plans to subdivide the 5 acres. It's going to continue to be one 5-acre lot. I would ask that you check the print date on the bottom left-hand corner. We made some revisions to this plat last night, and you should have received an updated copy this morning. The print date should be January 20th, 2015 at 5:11 p.m. The revision that we made was adding a 40-foot dedicated street or right-of-way on the east side of the property and extended the usable space to 5 acres. So there's a total of 5.37 acres in the subdivision.
Anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Obergewich?
So Quentin, the 5 acres is without the right-of-way? Correct.
Okay. The lot is 5 acres. The right-of-way acreage is 0.37 acres.
If I may, so your legal description that's on the legal description as we find it now on the plat reflects that it was adjusted to reflect that 5.37 acres.
Correct.
Okay,
it has been extended 40 feet to the west.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this. Please feel free to come forward and we'll listen to your comments. Any other questions, comments from the commission? This time I'd ask Mr. Josephson Mr. Milestone, if you'd like to give us a recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commission members. City staff recommends approval of this minor plat.
Thank you. Anyone have any further questions? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the minor subdivision plat for the Rindale subdivision as depicted in the application materials, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
A motion by Mr. Elkins, is there a
I'll
second?
second.
A second. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Preliminary plat recommended for approval. Thank you very much. Second item on our regular agenda is a special use permit. It's to consider a request for a telecommunication tower special unit permit for use permit for Buell Consulting Incorporated. The site is situated at 11140 34th Street Southwest. Property is approximately 0.23 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse Diamond. I represent Buell Consulting, and I also represent Verizon Wireless on their tower. As you stated, this is going to be located at 11140 34th Street Southwest in Dickinson. It will be a 110-foot steel tower with a 9-foot lightning rod at the top. It will have an unmanned equipment shelter at the bottom, which would be visited by a tech from time to time, usually about once a month, to verify that's anything there. And then obviously under any emergency or any lights that pop up in the shelter. Once in a while we get an alarm. Really, at this point, I'll take some questions. It's a pretty straightforward monopole on this one.
At this time, anyone have any questions, comments? So, what's the nearest building and use to this tower location?
Let me look quick. I apologize. I took this one over for a buddy, so.
No, I'm just wondering before, just seeing
Yes,
your level
thank
of
you.
concern about your neighbors is all.
Absolutely. So there is a building. It's 902 feet away, and it's to the southwest.
And this is a freestanding tower, no guide,
Correct.
nothing else supporting it.
Correct. A monopole is hollow in the center. It tapers in just a little bit, but basically it's a pretty standard pole that you would see around.
Has the city recommended any certain color or non-colors on this tower?
No, generally it's a galvanized, but a non-shiny galvanized,
Mhm.
so that it doesn't reflect the sunlight back.
And does the FAA or any other government agency require any type of lighting on it?
Generally not on this one, but we always apply through the FAA and FCC, so if they do recommend one, we would put a light on that.
Uh-huh.
Generally, we recommend doing a red light because white light is more irritating to the human eye, so red light's a little less evasive.
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Mr.
this
Elk.
question is to Gene. Has the city, recognizing that this is the Cordy subdivision, and that growth within that subdivision, I mean, we've noticed that whole area is being developed for single-family residential. Is this going to interfere in any way with what's been taking place in that area?
Well, there are two things that I was going to bring up this morning, and I'm not sure how I feel about them, but if the Cordy property is developed, and, while to us sitting here, it looks like a prime area for development, I guess we don't know if that's going to happen. But this tower would be very close to residential construction. Now, our land use plan does show a narrow strip of commercial along 40th up there as future land use. But even if that holds, this is going to be very, very close to a residential area. So it makes me wonder if it is the right place for a tower. The second thing, and again, I'm not sure how I feel about this either, but you've got 3 requests in here this morning, and I noticed the one to the west in the Westridge area, you're paving the parking area. But the other 2, it appears you're not going to pave the parking areas. If this was a different commercial or industrial development, we would expect them to pave the parking areas. I don't know how important that is for a tower site like this, but just because it's very small, I'm not sure we shouldn't ask for the same thing we would on any commercial area. But I'd like to know what you guys think.
I recognize the need for communication towers. I'm just asking, and maybe Mark, you could better answer this, if this is a proper location for something like this.
Actually, Commissioner Elkin, we had looked at that, and first of all, the portion that this is in is shown as commercial on the future land use map. And then secondly, at this time, we've not received it. Mr. Cordy is knowingly leasing this property to Verizon. So whether or not there are any plans in the future for him to come in and propose a subdivision, at this point we don't know. I think it speaks something that he's willing to lease the property to Verizon. I can't speculate what his development plans are, but I think we have an insight if he's saying that at this point we're willing to lease this property to Verizon for 119, 19-foot telecommunications tower.
I can speak to a little bit of that also. So both of your points have totally been discussed with the landlord. If the surrounding area does get developed and everything else is concrete or whatever, driveway material, it has been recommended by the landlord and has been brought up to Verizon as a future need so that we don't have a gravel road next to a bunch of non-gravel roads. It just causes a mess. And so that has been discussed. The other thing that has been discussed is whether or not this landlord will be developing this. And it has been discussed that he is waiting to see what happens with this cell phone tower before he was going to present anything. Now, I can't speak to any time frame. Obviously, I don't know that, but that he did want to know this was approved before he submitted anything, because obviously this would change his plan if this was or was not approved.
Okay, and obviously that he would come in and he would plat the property, and this would be a separate platted.
Correct.
This would be a separate platted lot. It's not unusual to see commercial or industrial subdivisions that have cell towers, in them. I think the trick is that if they do residential on the rest of it, to make sure that there's adequate separation between to ensure that. From what the applicant was telling me, you may want to discuss the lease situation at this point. Do you want to discuss the lease situation that you told me about, Jesse?
Absolutely. So the lease consists of, are you speaking about like the terms and whatnot?
The length of the lease.
Absolutely. So a lease with our landlords is generally set up, and in this case is the same. We start out with a 5-year lease, and then every 5 years it is self-renewed up to 4 times, so that equals a 25-year lease with the landlord. And as everybody knows, I mean, Verizon is needed so terribly bad in this area. And to the north there, we did approach a lot of the landowners around, and this particular landlord was just very open and interested. A lot of the businesses around there understood that their business is growing at leaps and bounds, and their space is so very limited that they're just using every square inch. And not that we try and take up all that much land, we try and take up as the minimum that we can. It's still tough to give away 1/3 of an acre that they then can't use. and Mr. Cordy was willing to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Josephson, do you, you know the separation numbers between a cell tower and if someone wants to build a building next to it? How close? What is the separation on there?
You know, typically, we don't have anything in the code right now. Typically, what we've asked is that, the tower be at least, you know, any development be at least, you know, no closer than the height of the tower, itself, and also from the property line, you know, from the property line also. You know, but if we look at a plat, you know, we could certainly take that into, you know, into account. Now, what the applicants tell us about the towers is if they do collapse, they're supposed to fall into themselves. I think it's like 90% of it falls into themselves. So it's not like the tower, the structural engineer will tell you that the tower just doesn't flip over, you know, just doesn't flip over like, you know, like this. In other municipalities, there's typically a separation between, the separation is between residential and the cell tower, you know, not so much from commercial, you know, from commercial buildings. But yes, they'd have to be, any sort of building would have to be located at least as far away as the height of the tower.
Is that arbitrary or is that in ordinance somewhere?
We don't have that in ordinance. It's certainly, we've discussed amending the ordinance to have, you know, to have setbacks, you know, to have setbacks in there.
And that's no big deal. I mean, it's no different than having a big tree right next to your house.
Mm-hmm.
What if you do? It's going to fall over. It's going to fall over. I mean, just like, so you're living next to a 60 or 70-foot oak tree. That tree doesn't have to be, whatever, 70 feet from your house.
Previously, we had a cell tower application, and it was out on the west side, where the cell tower would have actually been, there would have been an existing industrial structure that was within the height, you know, that limitation, the height of their, I think they were within 50 or 60 feet of a tower that was, you know, taller than that. And we actually got a letter from the property owner saying that they didn't object to the tower being that, you know, being that close. So at this point, what we're looking at is to make sure that any development is located at least the length, you know, the length of the tower. I think we do need to come back and propose, with the number of cell towers we've been getting, is to actually put something in the code that makes it explicit, you know, that actually addresses separation from residential and non-residential structures.
Mr. Dime, is there any, on the other side of that, from the people who have the towers perspective, is there any distance they would like to see in the height of businesses in close proximity to the towers?
Do you mean the surrounding businesses that are
Yeah, if someone
existing?
wants to build a 70-foot building, you know, 50 feet away from the tower, or 100 feet.
I haven't heard anything on that.
Okay.
So, I mean, when dealing with my cell phone towers, we take any recommendation by any city or jurisdiction and try and make that work. In this case, we made sure to stay the distance away from the road and anything existing. Again, our closest building is 900 feet away, with the understanding that things will be built around it and that they would be, that you guys would take that into consideration. But right now, we are following every regulation to a T, even the recommendations.
I don't know how germane it is to the whole conversation here, but could you say again what the conversation was with the landowner as far as him waiting to see what happened with the tower in his development, his future? I didn't quite understand that.
Sure. So again, I have pieces of this because I was handed this site most recently, but when speaking to the landlord and handing this site off, we discussed the fact that at the start of this, that we understood that he was planning on developing this area, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to go through our process and then him all of a sudden start throwing a curveball in there with his development. And so it was my understanding that he was going to wait until this was fully approved or fully denied until he came up with his plan so that he could develop
So
with
he
the
can work around
understanding.
it if
Yeah,
need be. Yeah,
exactly.
okay. I get it.
One thing I did want to Steve Josephson, City County Planner, should have put that on the record before, that I wanted to ask about was the Commissioner Jackson's discussion of a paved approach and, paved approach and driveway. Is that something that you would be amenable to as a condition of the special use permit?
I haven't spoken to Verizon about that, and I apologize. I don't see that as being an issue with Verizon, so if that is something that is recommended, I don't foresee that as being an issue on their end. However, I have not spoken to them about that, and that is my intention to do so.
Can I ask, you show pavement on the one in Westridge. Why is that?
The one on Westridge is specifically in line with Roar's development. They are going to be building, at the recommendation of the city, a child care center. And so this is basically, we're working together with them to try and pair this cell phone tower next to their proposed daycare center, have the correct distances between them, and then share an approach, which was requested by the city also. And obviously, if they're coming in with pavement, it doesn't make sense to not do the same on this ourselves. And that is the difference. On this one, currently there is nothing to match.
But this is the only chance we have to attach that requirement.
Understood.
So this is approximately .23 acres, I believe is what it said.
Yep.
But if we go by the standards that are not really in writing but have been mentioned to apply, it would take up approximately an acre as far as any building being within. It could be 119-foot tower, so that's approximately 240 feet, a 240-foot square, right?
Okay.
So that's a little over an acre of property that it's going to affect. And that would be a building not within 119 feet of the tower or the height of the tower, but someone could build that far away and still own property up to the boundaries of this property, but not be able to use it, essentially, other than good looks.
Yeah,
Or
it would
roadway or
be
something,
a setback,
right?
yes.
So it's going to take up, essentially, tie up over an acre of property.
But isn't that setback in locating a tower? It's not so much locating the building next to the tower, is it?
Well, as I said, we had one previously where there was an issue of a building being within the tower height, and staff recommended approval for that because they had gotten a letter from the building owner saying they didn't object to the tower being that close.
But that's when you're replacing a tower.
Yes.
If somebody came in to build a building, I'm not sure we'd prevent them, would we?
At this point, I'm not sure. I think what I really need to do is come back to Planning and Zoning Commission and talk about what other local governments have done in terms of placing commercial and industrial, commercial buildings adjacent to a cell tower. And that's some research I can do and come back in the future, especially if I can come back next month, especially if Mr. Cordy is talking about coming in and actually platting this property.
Okay. So I think a real question too here is, okay, this particular piece of property, how does it fit in our comp plan? I'd like to hear that again. How does it fit the comp plan? Is this going to be a commercial area? And so this would be sitting in a commercial?
This would be sitting in commercial future land use category.
But I would remind you all, we're showing commercial for the entire first mile on the south side of 40th. And we know that in the Cook area that's now being developed as residential,
Yeah.
right up to 40th, most of it. So we don't know, even though our land use plan says commercial, we don't.
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question for
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
Diamond.
Lewis.
Just one engineering thing, and I think this is, you know, from a elevation standpoint, a good site plan. It looks like you're trying to connect to 40th Street at the high point of 40th Street at the crest of the curve. The tower site itself will go on the crest of the hill, but we have a little angle in the road. And as I looked at it, I thought, well, maybe we should request that you straighten that road out so we don't have to plat around kind of a diagonal road. But then the more I thought about it, it's a good access point onto 40th Street where we would probably want an access road, you know, into the development. If we would extend that access road straight south and come along the west side of this tower site with a full city street at some point in the future, is that little rectangle, I guess it's a little square, on the west side of the site, is that something that is there right now? Is it something that's proposed? And if a road came through, could it be moved? There's just a small,
Do you mind if I come over and you point it out to me so I know exactly what you're...
Here, I can. There. And if we would build a street straight south, is that something?
So with my understanding coming from construction, I can almost be positive that that's probably our electrical panels. So if it was recommended that we move that to another area within the compound, because of your interest in building a road in that general area. Now remember, the box there is our leased area, and so we would want to have the ability to use our entire leased area.
And I think that would still be doable if this road was built where your approach is right now, and a city street would come straight south from there. You'd generally follow along the west side of your leased area.
Okay.
But if, you know, if we had to do some grading there and we wanted to shape the leased area a little bit and cut or fill a couple feet, could we move that box? And I'm hoping the answer is yes, or maybe the box could be relocated to the other side of the lease site, because it would be a good spot for a city street in the future.
Verizon would have to make the call on that.
Sure.
I certainly understand your standpoint, but I'd like to make sure that Verizon's aware of this.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Would you like to make any other comments on this?
I guess if there were conditions, if you did place them, if it was possible to still approve it with these conditions, for me to bring them back to Verizon and get some feedback from them, and I would, again, I'm assuming that the electrical panels could be moved. I'm assuming that, you know, everything else we've talked about would be okay with them in the pavement versus gravel. Just to keep our process moving forward, if that is possible, I would like that, but I totally understand if we needed to table it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. L.
when do you anticipate putting this project together? When do you need an answer on this project?
As far as our current build plan, this is either going to go in the end of this year or this is going to go in early next year is the current build plan.
So would it be wise, I'm going to ask Steve, would it be wise to ask for a continuance until these issues are resolved?
I'll ask the applicant. You know, it may be so until we get some answers from the applicant. You know, because there have been a number of issues that have been raised today. I think the primary one has to do with the access road and the location of it, because in the future, if that's going to be that could become a platted street. So, you know, the other thing it gives me a chance to do is to look at other ordinances and see about the placement of cell towers in relation to other, to commercial structures. So that month would give us an opportunity that month would give us an opportunity to look at, to try and answer those issues.
Do you have any knowledge of this particular special use permit for this particular tower? Is it involved in any way with the other two that we're going to talk about today? Are they in any way connected? Does one affect the other? Or is it totally separate issues? Can two towers be put up without the other one, specifically in this location?
Every tower is individual in the sense that every tower is going to cover some type of need. So if there's a hole in the network, if there's just a need for more data or whatnot, everyone stands alone in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But Verizon's overall plan is every one of these is specifically placed because of holes and the need, and obviously they distribute their signal over a circled area, so there will be overlaps and whatnot, but every one of these is my RF engineers that I call mad scientists because they have all these formulas that they figure out exactly where they go. They have a specific reason why this one goes here, why Empire goes on the west side, why Tiger goes on the east side. There's very specific reasons why they are going in these particular spots. But if we built Empire this year and we built Tiger 2 years from now and we built Country Oaks next month, everyone can be built individually, yes.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Frederick.
Just a comment. We can't require him to pave this and approve it today. I mean, the street issue is going to be brought up in plating anyway, is it not? If they plot the property?
Yeah, the street issue would be brought up during plating.
I mean, if it has
It's-
to be moved over 10 feet, is it going to? I mean, we don't even know that street's going to go there for sure, do we?
No, we don't know that it's going to be platted.
Exactly.
And I also don't know if 40th Street right now, you're grading out to a gravel road. When we design and construct 40th Street, I don't know that this is the top of the hill and we're going to want to cut the top of the hill down 10 more feet either. It's just, I think it's a great location for it. It's just there's a lot of, not even engineering, but just some real simple grading things that we would require if it were a plat coming in. If this weren't a special use permit, it was a plat, we'd want a little more engineering detail to it. I don't think there's anything that's prohibitive that we could not work around in the future. But I guess this is the opportunity to not have to work around things in the future too.
So then if we require him to pave it, it would be more difficult if down the road we needed to grade it out.
Well, it'd just be
We'd have to tear up.
money that you'd be tearing up, yeah. And I think personally, on the paving requirement, I think it is a good request or condition to make, but maybe it's a time-sensitive condition that's, if this is platted, then the special use permit, that condition would kick in when this is platted or annexed or whatever the trigger would be, and that paving would need to happen within 12 months of that trigger, something like that.
Sure. I mean, we all know the property. I mean, this thing's been talked about for 5 years now, getting developed, and nothing's ever come out of it. I mean, it could be another 10 years, who knows, with this landowner. So I was just wondering if we could make that condition. I mean, if it's platted, then it has to be paved, or, the street's got to work around it. I mean, asking them to wait, I'm not sure what benefit that is for us. I mean, can you tell me a benefit of making them wait another month?
Well, that's up to the commission here, but I think it's good discussion to have. If you're comfortable with it today, we move forward. I think we need to get the conditions in the motion. And
The only reason I asked that, Jason, was that for continuance, would it be wise? I'm asking on behalf of the planner as well as the engineer.
Yeah.
if they can apply those as conditions to this, and Verizon, if you can't answer for Verizon, is what you basically stated.
Yeah, it's never been in discussion, and so again, if I speak for them and they have the slightest bit of an issue with it, I certainly don't want to have that conversation. Again, I really do not see that as being anything that would hold us up from, if that's a condition that you put on it. Which is why, if you could, I just need a couple of days just to get the conversation, just let them know we got to make a decision on this.
Especially since the tower is not going to probably be going in until the end of next year anyway. Another 30 days is not going to hurt these people at all. That was my feeling, but it's up to this board.
It was the end of this year or beginning of next year.
Well, the end of this year, I mean, we're 11 months away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does take some pretty significant time to build a tower, get it placed, find all that stuff. So, you know,
But in the meantime, you'd be resolving these issues with the city and with the city engineer, and knowing you'll be able to move forward anyway, as long as Verizon is going to address these issues. As of today, you really can't address these issues.
not today, yes.
Yeah.
But your request was us to approve it with these conditions, and then if Verizon doesn't agree, then obviously we would be back starting over anyway, would we not?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
if we
would.
approved and said we wanted it paved and you needed to work with the city engineer on this access, I mean, you'd have to talk to Verizon anyway.
Yep.
This-
And if they said no, then we'd be back to square one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in this, I should remind you, in this case, with this being in the extraterritorial zone, our engineering doesn't get involved with this at this point. So that's the county road superintendent.
That's the problem with an EPZ.
You're gonna have to take this back to Verizon one way or the other with conditions, or there's gonna be continuance, and you can just say, well, we're still talking about it. And hopefully there could be some answers, because yeah, all by itself, just standing out there and nothing being developed, no problem with anybody probably. But we hope that in the future that this is developed properly, and the road concern has got to be a big issue with someone, whether it's in the lease. If 40th is changed, graded, whatever, and all of a sudden your access is totally different, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the road going back into your leased property? There's going to be Verizon, it's going to be the property owner, it's going to be the county, city. Who's going to pay for that? I think it's worth a continuance, especially when there's no real need for expediency here. You guys got a lot of experience putting towers up. I mean, once things are approved, it's like, okay, we got 100 of these towers in some garage somewhere, let's go, put it up. And you need electricity, you need all the other things too. So I would hope that 1 month with better answers probably is going to be more expedient than giving an okay right now with a bunch of conditions. That's my feeling on it.
I would say whatever your comfort level is, that there's been significant discussion today about this, and I would say you'd give them a chance to go back and talk to Verizon about it, instead of imposing a condition and then they have issues.
And I
they
think
have
this
issues
is
with it.
also more of an issue too with the property owner, that his implication of what he's going to do with this property may depend on what happens with this particular application. That may affect how this property moves along in development. And that would be great to see it, move along in some direction.
Is there an existing entrance here on 40th West where it comes in? Is that why you've chosen that location, or why is the entrance road to your site not perpendicular to 40th Street itself? Is that kind of what you were talking about, Mr. Kubas?
It was, and I think it's, I don't know that there's a a distance, a tie to 10th Avenue West or to Highway 22, but it looks like there is an existing, gravel approach coming off
Okay.
40th West at the high point, the crest of the curve.
Okay.
And, yeah, things can be adjusted 10 feet, 20 feet in the future. But I guess now is our time to take a look at it, so.
It's just made me think about a situation where I've seen another cell tower where it comes in, it comes perpendicular to it, and then there's another perpendicular turnoff where you would go to the cell tower, and that location was surrounded by a park so that you could, if for some reason it were to develop in the future, continue going south, and there could be something to the south, or have that commercial along the line, and somewhere kind of along the lines instead of having that jog out in an angle to have something surrounding it, whether it's commercial to the north of it or a park or something like that surrounding it. So I was just wondering why the road went at that angle.
The approach right now is an existing field approach. So obviously we want to try and use anything that's existing. Approaches have distances between them. You can have so many in a certain distance. So anytime that there's an existing, we're going to use that. The topography of the land in that area is sloping, and so we always try and go in a flat area so that we're disturbing the land as little as possible. And so that's the reason why we're going to the east and not coming straight out. It is ours in Verizon's best interest to go straight. It's just less cost.
Oh, okay.
And so if from an engineering design standpoint, it made sense to go straight, we would. It just kind of comes down to, with this slight slope to the east in the road, that's going to be a better design point and a better piece of land to go on, so we don't have to bring in a big bulldozer and level it
It's just the 2
ourselves.
points make a line, this is where we're going to put it, we don't have to bother anything kind of deal. Okay.
Right, exactly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
So I'm to assume that these elevations are correct on here, is that what I'm reading, that there's only 2-foot difference at the most on the property itself, and the elevations on the road are anywhere from 79 to 77 maybe, 76 at the corner. So there's not much of a difference in elevations on where the road would be placed or the tower itself. Are those elevation lines on there I'm reading?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Any other questions or comments at this time?
You know, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jackson?
if we're okay with the location generally, I don't see why we can't approve this today, put the conditions on it, and if he has to come back to modify the conditions or whatever, that's up to Verizon. But to me, this big question still is, are we okay with the location generally? It sounds like we are.
And that would be our request. That would be our preference, is to approve it today with conditions.
All right.
Unless staff is seeing a reason to delay this.
Okay.
No, it's, whatever your preference is, if these aren't necessarily burning issues at this time, and I don't really see them as being so, I don't see a reason to not go forward. I can still go ahead for the future and research the setback standards, from uses and bring that back to you. So as we see more of these cases and look at possible code amendments, so that at least we have that out. We have that in our code, so. But no, I don't see a reason to not go forward today.
And in the past, Verizon has been more than willing to work. I know in the county, we've placed a number of them, and you have been willing to work with the county. So I don't see that as being an issue, other than maybe placing those 2 conditions on or 2 conditions for the conditions.
And do you guys think it's workable if there's a delayed requirement for paving? In other words, that somehow we delay it until development occurs around it?
Or until they
Can
come
you
in.
enforce that?
You know, currently that's in, here's the thing, currently that's in the extraterritorial zone. So I don't know how you could really enforce that until it actually came into the city
Well, if
itself.
it was developed, it probably would come into the city. So
Mhm. You know, and then there's some, you know, it's just that there's some delay and so on, but I guess what I'm wondering is how do you catch up with a condition how do you catch up with a condition
That's my
like that?
Yeah.
Like that, if they're already there and it's already approved, and then it could be 2 years, 5 years, you know, 5 years and so on. So I'm not sure how you can, you know, how you could enforce a condition like that. I think probably better to catch it during the platting phase, you know, when they come in with their subdivision, you know, and catch it then and see if that's going to be actually part of a road. The road, it is a concern of, are you going to have a separate access point there that's going to serve just the tower? And I think typically that doesn't make a lot of sense.
But we've all made the assumption that this property was going to be developed, and that really should have happened a long time ago.
Mhm.
You know, we've been assuming that for 4 or 5 years. Who knows?
Mhm.
It could be 50 before he
Mhm.
decides to develop that
Or
property.
to even come into the city. What I would say is if they do annex in and come in with a preliminary plat, then at that point, it wouldn't make sense, it would make sense to have an access point that would incorporate the access point that's approved for the tower.
At the
Is-
present time, the county would only require what? Hard surface.
I believe so.
So there's, down the road, and a question for Mr. Kubas, someone comes in with a development for the whole area surrounding this tower, and the roadway you would have spoke about you would want to develop. So is there a real difficult problem in putting a condition in here as far as changing the access to this tower property?
Well, I don't think so. Just thinking how to simplistically write that as a condition that wouldn't be overbearing or too restrictive to Verizon, and wouldn't allow the developer carte blanche to completely vacate this easement either. I guess what I'd like to see maybe is that in the future, because my understanding of the special use permit, we have a 30-foot wide access/utility right-of-way is how it's called out on the special use permit, that I'm assuming would be in effect as long as the special use permit is in effect. Could we make a condition to this that would say that if this property surrounding the special use permit would be developed, that their access easement would be dedicated or some other way granted to the public for use as right-of-way? And I mean, I don't think legally could take away their access. I would just like to make a portion of it become a city street, if that makes sense. And maybe, like Mr. Frederick said, it doesn't make sense to put a street there when we see a development plan for this. And this 100-foot access road just remains a 100-foot access road, and there's streets that are a quarter mile away, and we never touch this. I just don't want to take away our ability to put a street here if it makes sense in the development next year or 5 years down the road. So if the condition could be that the access and utility easement could be converted to public right-of-way in the future, I think it takes a maintenance responsibility away from Verizon in the future if this is a public street. It'd be kind of, I hope, a win-win for everybody, and it would allow the development a little more flexibility. Because who knows who and when this might come forward as a development. So that's all I'm asking for, is probably leaves us a little flexibility, leaves the developer some flexibility in the future.
The only comment I would have on that is the enforceability, the enforceability of that, that's the issue that I have, is how do you enforce something like that? Or do you catch this during during the preliminary plat stage, because they're going to have to show this. They're going to have to show this property as part of their plat, and service, and service to service to the cell tower would have to be part of whatever internal road system they had.
I hate to belabor this, but I can see a scenario where we'd want to eliminate that access.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a street 100 feet east or west, and we just want to eliminate that access and make the access come from one of those side streets.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's right that we have the ability to do that.
I do too, because I think it would be easy to just say, oh, sounds too complicated, can't enforce it, but it could become a thorn in somebody's side, the city's side, forever if we don't. There's got to be, I think there's got to be a mechanism in place that could be done, and it's enforceable. I just believe it, and that should be looked at, that for future planning. If we don't look at it, it is going to be another one of those things that, why in the heck did they do that, or didn't do that, or didn't think about it? And Mr. Kubas has thought about it. And
So perhaps a condition that says that this access is temporary, temporary until the property is platted.
I mean, we should have a map with lights on it with all these temporary things flashing. And I mean, there's got to be a way to catch that. I mean, there's got to be a way in documentation that when something comes in the future, that it should, should stand right out there that, yes, this is temporary, and if the city is going to develop this, and a developer comes along and with a plan for this property, that's what's going to happen in the future.
In my opinion, and I wish Mr. Colling was here to help me answer this up, I think all these conditions that we place, either, with special uses in a PUD, they're all enforceable. It's just to have awareness and understanding and to go, hey, there was a condition placed on this property or this use, and to go back. And a lot of times with a lot of turnover and a lot of development, those things do fall through the cracks. And so I hope everything we do here and the conditions that we place are enforceable. Sometimes they're maybe pushing the limits of it being enforceable, but it's just a matter of having staff, step back and go, wait, there was something here that we had a condition, and to trigger that sometimes is hard, because it's almost just, we need to remember.
Yeah, I guess my thinking is we would have an something that says the access point on here will be used until such time as until the property is platted.
Sure.
I'm changed my mind. I think we should delay this a month and give the staff time to write
Mhm.
conditions in here. They can work with Mr. Colling if need be. Let's get it right, rather
Okay.
than trying to do it here on
I think so, and I think that's a good idea. I think, depending on what action we take, that you would still have a document to take back to Verizon saying, there are conditions on this, and here's what I think the future condition, there's going to be a couple more attached probably, that would not probably limit Verizon in any way to do what they want to do, or the property owner, or adversely affect the lease. But we would like to get it straight from the city's perspective for future use.
And Jesse, that's, Mr. Diamond, you can go back to Mr. Cordy and say, well, if you're going to have a development plan, plan that that access to the parcel that this is on will be provided, that'll be shown in whatever plat they come forward with. I think that makes the most sense.
Does this discussion make any sense to you?
You better
That's
say
a
yes.
fair question.
No.
Yes.
I guess my only thought is there's a current code and I'm meeting that code. Verizon has always and will always be willing to try and meet everything. We've gone to the code, we've gone to recommendations, and we've done all that. So I understand totally to a point that you guys have to go beyond my thinking and think about the bigger picture. I heard you guys discuss that this replatting has been on the books or discussed for a long period of time, being 5 years or so. And Verizon's putting this in front of you guys right now with a firm plan to build this in a relatively short period of time. And although there are factors that you guys have to think about, I do understand that. This is a current plan. There is no current plan around this. We are meeting every expectation and every recommendation. And to delay this, to try and think of a possible replat in the future, doesn't necessarily hold us up to our current build plan, but it puts a little bit of worry and a little bit more stress on Verizon to try and meet something that they're unaware of. We have this current design for a specific reason because, again, it's an existing access point. It brings us right into our site, which again doesn't go straight because of the slope to the property. And we factored all those in. We haven't had an opportunity to go into possibilities. We're looking at current.
If I could make a suggestion, perhaps what you can do is if you wish, is this, we may not have to delay this a month, is just direct us to develop some sort of a condition that would say that if this is ever platted, the access will come from a platted road, and we can get together with Attorney Colling and craft the kind of the kind of language that would that would reflect that.
Mr. Chairman, please educate me because I don't know how this works. Does Verizon ever sell a tower, or do they just lease space to other providers or networks?
The reason why we have a 100-foot by 100-foot lease area is so that we can allow co-locators on it. So Verizon leases directly from the property owner, and then a co-locator would then lease from Verizon. I don't know if lease is the right word, but they would co-locate and they would report to Verizon. We obviously want people to co-locate. Nobody wants a tower next to a tower next to a tower. You've seen it. It's not desired, and so that is our intention. The reason why we go with 100-foot by 100 foot, so you can fit 2 or 3 more people on there, AT&T, Sprint, I can start naming them off, but that is the intention. If there's ever an interest from fire and police for emergency services, Verizon always is willing to put up some type of radio whip antenna on the tower. We obviously want to work with local governments and whatnot to provide that space, and obviously they would be responsible for their own power, but that's why we put in a power bay that generally has 4 to 6 slots so people can meter their own power and whatnot. So we have full intention of other people having the ability to go in there.
But has Verizon ever sold a tower, or is that not something that happens?
In the history of Verizon, I'm sure they have. This is totally not their interest on this tower.
And when you say co-locate, that's not another tower. It'd just be another building with somebody else's equipment in it, right?
Yeah, let me clarify that. So a co-locate would be the existing tower with a new set of antennas at a different height level, and then another equipment shelter on the ground with obviously the same type of setup with wires running to it.
Now, you said that these towers is like services a circle, an area. How big of an area is this tower servicing?
My mad scientists aren't here to answer that.
Because if it services a circle and there's not another building of any kind within 900 feet of this, is that true?
Right, but we're talking about a distance of miles.
Miles, okay.
Yeah. So the old analogs went for 10 or 15-year-old massive car phone. That sucker could get a tower in Canada.
Okay.
So really, these go for, I've heard a rough estimate of 6 miles at low usage. Again, the more usage you get, the less distance it goes. So if you don't have anybody for 900 feet and it's kind of sparsely populated right now, it will hit a larger area. once you start building that area and there is more usage, that area will shrink, and they do factor that in with the understanding that Dickinson's growing as fast as any other city in the state.
So Verizon believes that this area probably will fill in then.
We do understand that the intention is that your map is going to continue to fill in. Now, whether or not it fills in all the way up to the top and it fills in or fills out, I don't know that, but we understand that its current need and its future need will continue to grow, and they're planning for that.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions?
So do we not feel as a board that if a plat came in 2 years from now, we would catch this?
I think we would.
I think there could be a problem with the lease, though. The lease is going to take priority over the plating. If there's a lease there with an access easement, we won't have any choice. That's there.
Yeah, that was my question.
So, I hate to delay it. I'd like to get things done too. I hate to delay anybody. But I think to get this right, let's let these guys add a condition or two. And I think you're getting the impression that we'll approve the site. Probably approve the site. We just want to get this right. It'll be best for you too, for Verizon.
That's what I feel, that you could take a clean document back to Verizon probably in a month. I mean, if we continue this to next month, I think the verbiage could be put in there and the conditions could be put in there that it's going to, take care of the city's needs. And there's no desire, it looks like, there's nothing here that's been said that nobody wants a tower there. It sounds like the tower would be fine.
Right.
But there are things that, we've got a lot of things around the city that somebody should have said something a while back, and then it's an eyesore or a blight or a problem down the road. And they become expensive and not good conditions to live around. But I think you could, satisfy Verizon.
Just so staff knows, what are we wanting them to, are we talking paving the site? Are we talking moving that electrical box? Are we talking some kind of language that just says that the road might move? Just so they know what they have to go back for. I think we need to clarify what condition we want put in there.
Let's ask them what they've heard.
Okay, well, what we've heard is that we want some sort of guarantee that when the area is platted, that it be served by a street as part of the subdivision. I've heard different things about whether or not to pave that road, because on the one hand we say, well, it ought to be paved, but on the other hand, if they're going to move that road, then they may need to rip that up, and build a new one that would be paved. So I've heard a couple of different things in that regard. But mostly what I've heard is that there be some sort of condition that in the future if this property is platted, that it be served by a road within the subdivision, and the proposed access point that they're showing would more than likely go away if that was not where the road was.
So the road and the site actually are going to be separate. The site, are we going to recommend paving the particular site, and the road that would be approved now would meet county standards of some
hard surface.
surface.
Yeah. I don't believe that at this time that I really care to see that road paved,
Mm-hmm.
just because of in the event that it has to be moved.
Sure.
It's
Yep.
an extra burden and cost for them.
Yep.
So then what I would say is that we've heard a condition that if this property is platted, that the site will be served by a platted roadway.
Sure.
And that's what I've heard.
And Mr. Chairman, just to
Oh, yeah.
clarify the other discussion about that the site itself would be paved and then the road would not, though, at this point, that we would require the site to be paved. That would be what I would think would make sense.
So far, I think that's what I've heard also.
No, when you say paved, so generally within our lease area, we generally don't pave. So within the 100-foot by 100-foot, we generally leave that as gravel. And then if there is a road that is met up that is a different material, that is generally from outside the lease area to the other point of road, that's generally what we would pave.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I would ask,
Yes, ma'am.
since we are talking about towers perhaps that have gone in before, what is the standard that we have asked for?
We've not asked for it to be paved, and that's also true with subdivisions too, because we look at the use. And they don't park there for any period of time. There's nobody who's in the site. We've made sure to put a condition in here that there's no outdoor storage that takes place on there. So it's standard practice to, given the site to just hard surface it and gravel instead of paving the site itself, because it's an unoccupied structure. They've got the tower out there, they've got a generator, they have a generator out there, they put a fence around it, and there's no other structures. There are no other, any of the structures there are related only to the operation of the tower itself.
Mr. Chairman, then I would change my last comment, just whatever our standard is.
Sure.
If we were assuming there was development around it,
Mhm.
whatever that standard would be.
So then, do we have a history within city boundaries of okaying towers on non-paved sites?
Yes.
Okay.
And in actuality, what you're doing there is, if you pave it, then you've got the runoff. You've created the paving, you've got the stormwater runoff for that, and there's really nothing to protect by paving it.
Good. All right. Any other
I'd like to add
Yeah.
one comment too. I also
Sure.
agree with Jason and the applicant that kind of we have this perpetual concern for future development, but Verizon has the current plan in front of us, and that whenever the land is platted in the future, it would be the owner's responsibility to plan for the future land use and not Verizon. So I think that we're kind of going the opposite way and trying to have Verizon anticipate what the landowner's use is when they don't know, but they have a plan in front of us now ready to go, and it's up to the owner to kind of work their way around that, or if this is what we're going to put here and there, and how they're going to coordinate that, if they're going to have pie-shaped lots, or if they're going to have everything be a rectangle. And I don't think that's Verizon's responsibility, and that's why I agree with Jason that these guys have a plan right now to take place for something that we need right now, and not this perpetual concern for something that may never occur. So I just wanted to state that I agree with Jason.
I think it's a good comment. I do think though that, for Verizon, for the landowner themselves, there should be that concern in the future that the access may be moved based on future development. And I think there's some amount of concern there if some easements, or maybe they won't have to be changed for access to public services and utilities to the site. Would you see that, you think that would be changed or not? That should not be affected by a change of roadways, should it?
This is really
You
easy.
have to vacate.
All we'd be asking for is, I think, flexibility
Sure.
on this one. I think it's our jobs, and maybe this board's job, to look out for future activity. I know we have a plan in front of us, but we just made someone dedicate 40 feet of right-of-way for a road that might never get built in my lifetime.
Sure.
Because it's a part of our plan. If we don't have a plan, this site on its own merits is just fine. It really is. I have no concerns with it. But I think we do need to look out a little bit wider, and I think this is a really insignificant condition on the road that might never even apply. Like I said, the plan might come in front of us where big box retail along this, and we have an approach every quarter mile, and this little access just continues on forever. Just to give us some flexibility in the future, because we have too oftentimes looked at a project or a development on its own merits and said, this is fantastic, we need it. And then the next one comes in and we say, oh gosh, we should have done this a little bit differently on small scale stuff like this and on big scale stuff. So if we can give, like Mr. Josephson said, condition to staff, I think these are some simple conditions that we can, but they should be well thought out and conditions that maybe we can use in the future too. If we can approve it with the staff, I guess to give us the direction of staff to write a couple conditions after the meeting, I'm comfortable with that as well. I know Steve and Mark and myself, we can work together with Mr. Diamond and get those conditions written fairly quickly.
You know, just to make a comment here, and I know that I think Commissioner Ballesteros said it, where he said, said in the end it's going to be the responsibility of the developer. They're going to need to show on their preliminary plat where this tower is, and to address the access. I think the concern here is, are you going to have an access point that's still granted to the tower that conflicts with something, something in the future, and that's going to be the developer's responsibility to make sure that it's served. I think all we're doing here is making a caution of saying that in the future, if this property is ever platted, that the access will come from a platted street, within that subdivision, if there's a conflict, because if you've got one access point here, we have restrictions on how close the access points can be. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Kubis just summarized it really well, and
Sure.
I'll move to continue for a month or as long as people need to.
So I think
Bring it
what you're hearing here is that it's probably going to be continuous, but we'll vote. But what you're seeing is that we're dealing with land use. And a special use permit should not tie the hands of the city or county in future development, because this is a special use permit, and that lease could go in 5 years, 10, 15, 5-year increments, right? Could disappear.
can I ask?
So we have
sorry.
to deal with land use and future land use. So, and I think hopefully what you've heard, that I think your needs can be met. Anyone have any other comments?
I'll second Commissioner Jackson motion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want, I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, do you want to take public comment
I'm
at
going
this
to take
time?
public comment. If there's anyone else in the public who would like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward. Any other commissioner wish to make a comment? Well,
I just hope the next two don't take quite as long as the first one.
I will try not to take so long.
So,
So you can't. Okay.
I guess the only,
Okay.
I'm not opposed to
Okay.
continuing it. I have no issue with that. I just thought that, there would probably be a way we could put a condition on here and get it approved today. I mean, so.
mhm. Mr. Josephson, would you like to make a recommendation?
Sure. Certainly, Steve Josephson, city county planner. As the applicant said, this is a request for a 119-foot monopole on property that's currently zoned agriculture. Staff had recommended approval with a number of conditions. You've seen these before. Just a few that I wanted to highlight is that it's it's limited to the monopole and equipment building and generator and accessory structure. No outdoor storage would be permitted on the site. We talk about co-location. The tower, they do have to get a letter from the FAA prior to building permit issuance. The only signs allowed on there would be related to the tower itself, with no advertising. And the color is going to be it's going to be constructed of galvanized metal and be of an appropriate color to harmonize with the area. Typically, it'll just be the color of the galvanized metal. So that's the recommendation, is approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Josephson. This time we're going to close the public portion of this hearing. We already have a motion and a second, which I'm going to accept by Mr. Jackson, Mr. Elkin. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. And I do believe, though it is a continuance, you're probably going to have your answers very shortly. Mr. Kubis is shown that you'll probably get this worked out fairly quickly, and that we probably have a document in front of us to approve next month, I believe.
So just a quick question, would there be a document before the hearing that I could discuss with Verizon, or would that come at the hearing?
I would say yes, and they,
You know, we would send a draft condition to Mr. Diamond as soon as we
Sure.
draft something.
you would.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Our regular agenda, we have item 3 is a special use permit to consider a request for a telecommunication tower special use permit for Buell Consulting Incorporated. The site is located at 3031 Energy Drive, and the property is approximately 0.07 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Why, hello again. This is Jesse Diamond with Buell Consulting representing Verizon. As you alluded to, this is a 100-foot monopole with a 9-foot lightning rod on it. It is proposed across the street from Fisher Sand and Gravel at 3020 Energy Drive in Dickinson. It has the unmanned equipment shelter at the bottom. It'd be visited by a site tech about once a month. It is not housing anybody. We are going at the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Department to meet the setback equal or greater to the tower height. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Diamond? Mr. Diamond, how do you feel about that setback on the tower height? Do you agree with that? I mean, should it be less?
This one actually fits great. If I go too much less, I'm going to be in the drainage ditch. The intention of the discussion with the landlord was to have a separate access so there's no security risk of somebody with a Verizon code to go in there and disrupt Fisher Sand and Gravel's actual day-to-day things. They had had thefts in the past, and they wanted to have a separate access. So Verizon agreed to do that. We are taking up some of their area that they do park things, but that we do have a separate access specifically for that reason, for security. It's in a corner, which is great. We really want to disrupt their day-to-day as little as possible, and this is the best plan to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much. Anyone from the public wish to make comment on this special use permit application? If being none, Mr. Millstone, what we'd like to hear from you and your recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I forgot last time too, Mark Millstone, Interim Planning Director. City staff recommends approval subject to the same conditions that you heard Steve talk about a little while ago. The only other point I wanted to bring up is you had talked earlier about how it would fall. And the last sheet in this packet actually is a fall letter stamped by a structural engineer, which pretty much states that it would fall upon itself. So I just wanted to reiterate that. With that, I'm available for questions.
It kind of puzzles me. I mean, if we have these fall letters and structural engineer comments and design, why are we having this distance issue?
Maybe Mr. Joseph can help with that. I think that's been how we've
Especially in
handled
a
it
commercial
in the
place.
past.
Yeah, in a commercial area.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask Mr. Diamond to address that as to why the tower needs to be located where it is.
This one, again, is specifically located where it is because of how the land is around it. So this is a flat area. If we go any further towards the road, we're getting into a drainage ditch, which then worried about water and flooding and all that. Although I don't foresee that as ever being a problem, I don't want to ever have that be a problem. So we put this where it is specifically, and we will provide any fall letter that needs to, and we will never put public in harm's way. These can fall within themselves at, I mean, I've requested 75. I know they can go more, which is a percentage of where they fall. So it would fall 25% away. So 75% would fall within itself. So, I mean, at 150 feet, excuse my math, but I think it's like, well, it's certainly less than 50 feet.
How many have you seen fall down?
I repaired one in Wisconsin in 2012 that got hit by a tornado, and the only thing that it did was it took 3 1/4-inch steel and an antenna and bent the steel sideways, and the antenna's ports at the bottom were just smashed. Nothing fell, and that got hit by a tornado. So I've never seen one fall. And these monopoles aren't meant to fall. I mean, they're solid steel. The potential is there, and that's why we have to address it.
I guess, Mr. Diamond, the question is, why couldn't this be further back from the roadway?
If I'm further back, then I'm taking up more of the landowner's space.
Okay.
And then the landowner is less inclined to be interested.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Diamond,
Mr. Diamond.
more a curiosity question than anything else, but I have a hunch that this is in fill. Do you think this is in fill along that drainage? You guys take that into account, I assume?
Yeah,
Do you do
for
geotechnical work? Do you-
yeah, for every site we do an environmental study, which includes a bore, and so we understand what's there and underneath.
Thank you. Anyone from the public wish to make comment? Please feel free to come forward. Any further comments from the commission? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing. And I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval, subject to the conditions put forth by city staff.
Been a motion to approve. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Friedrich. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I had one question or comment. Talked a lot about road surfacing. I think we all clarified that the interior can be and has been on past ones gravel. Tying into a paved road, I think the site plan shows a gravel access, 16-foot wide gravel driveway. I know there's low traffic, but is that, I think, if it were any other development, we'd require a paved access, asphalt or concrete, however they would choose, but.
Right, and Mr. Kubis, we do have a condition that they've got to meet all applicable city requirements, and this is not in the extraterritorial zone. This is actually within city limits that requires, paved approach and driveway.
You aware of that, Mr. Diamond?
I was not aware of that. My intention was to match what's around us. So as you're coming down Energy Drive, Fisher Sand and Gravel's approaches are, for that parking lot that we're going into, we're all gravel. So that I was just matching that.
And I believe the reason those are all gravel is because when that was created, that wasn't within, I believe that wasn't within city limits. Or was it? And I don't believe that, if certainly anything there was developed to today's standards, we've got to go with the current standards in the code. So if that was developed under previous standards, it stands, they would be required to pave that if they improve the property. I believe it's 50% of the, if they added 50% of the existing building that's square footage that's out there, they would be required to pave that. But new approaches within the city would be required to be paved.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
I'll ask my questions offline. I just want clarification,
Sure.
if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, that would be in city code now. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the regular agenda is a special use permit application. It's to consider a request for a telecommunication tower special use permit for Buell Consulting Incorporated. Site is situated at 4141 15th Street North, and the property is approximately .22 acres. At this time, I'm going to ask the party presenting. Please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, everybody. This one again is located at 4141 15th Street North in Dickinson. This is in the Roars Development, West Ridge. It is a 110-foot monopole with a 9-foot lightning rod at the top. The whole area is being replatted, so I know that the replatting will be I forget what the actual zone will be that will be in, but I do know that in discussion with Steve and with Roars that we will make sure that it's the correct zone that we can put a tower on. I know it's in conjunction with the daycare center, and that we would share an approach with them. I plan on meeting the 110-foot setback, which makes sense just with, that road's actually elevated, and we want to be a ways away from that. There's also a floodplain that flows in, and we're trying to abut right up against that. If you look at our actual design, which is on page generally 2 and 3 of the construction drawings, it's hard to see on some of them because there's a lot of clutter, but that southwest corner is actually kind of cut off. And the reason why is that we keep a specific distance from the floodplain. And that's a requirement that the government has us under. Otherwise, we have to go through some pretty hefty environmental studies and whatnot. So in this case, it was in the best interest of Verizon to stay away from that. This will be paved. And that is to match the daycare center's driveway and the code. So I'll open up for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Diamond?
It appears this one, you're paving not just the access road, you're paving the parking area. And
Yeah, it was Roar's Development recommendation, and Verizon agreed that we would make it all consistent for aesthetic reasons and also for it just making sense. We don't need to track gravel all over the place.
I think we need to hear that they're doing it for aesthetic reasons because of the adjacent properties.
Yeah. That is good.
Just want to make that point, I guess. What in the building is a metal building again?
So the equipment shelter is like a brick building, and
It's a brick building.
yeah, I don't know the exact material. It's kind of, it looks like stucco.
And
Yeah.
again, for aesthetic reasons, probably.
I don't know. I'm not a designer on that one.
I'm just trying to make a point.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the drawing on A2, and it shows the bituminous, but then there's also an area that, I can't read it very well, proposed something rock. Is that because of the floodplain area for drainage, or why is that rock and the rest of it's bituminous?
Mr. Kubas?
I guess I don't know either. I wasn't the designer on it, but it's probably area that either needs to be, it doesn't need to be paved. It's not a parking lot. It's not a turnaround area. So it either has to be rocked or landscaped or seeded to grass. And here it's just a zero maintenance issue that I'd see would hopefully stay clean. It's clean rock over geotextile. That should be no weeds, no grass growing. One question I had on this, and Mr. Diamond and I had talked on this site quite a bit, as it related to floodplain. I think we're good on that issue. I wasn't aware that it was going to be a joint access with the daycare, and I don't think we've seen any plans on that yet. But most of these access roads that we've been looking at are probably pretty similar. I think this one shows, well, maybe there's a little contradiction. I think on the one sheet, I don't know if it's got a number, but it's a full page 8.5 by 11 site plan. It shows a 12-foot wide bituminous access road, and on another one it shows a 16-foot wide access road. But either way, if these buildings are going to be set back a ways from 15th Street, both this equipment shelter and I'm assuming probably the daycare as well, fire department's going to need to get into that one. If this is the access to both properties, I think they're going to require 20-foot wide minimum. And maybe that can be built in the future when the daycare comes along. Jeremy, maybe you have some more information on that. But as this is accessing more than just a basically unoccupied equipment shelter, we want to make sure we can get the fire trucks in there and probably allow for two-way traffic. I mean, this isn't going to be a service tech a week or a month. It'll be 100 trips a day, probably something. So maybe a little more thought. This is probably fine, and I don't know what the phasing of the two plans is. This is fine for, in my opinion, to service what you're doing today. If it's a joint access, though, I think we want to make sure it'll work.
Okay.
That's the only comment I had.
And you said 20-foot access?
Well, 20 foot is the minimum for fire access. But if it's truly a joint access to a busy daycare, presumably, we'd probably want to have it be 2 lanes wide, maybe 24 feet total.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. The frequencies that come from cell towers, is that it's the same as a radio tower? Is it the same type of frequency?
It's the same type. They have a transmit and a receive frequency, which is, you actually buy and sell frequencies. It's actually quite expensive when I actually found out about it. So Verizon specifically owns certain bands of frequency. And so Verizon's is specific to Verizon, AT&T is specific to AT&T. So yes, they have a range, and then within that range, they fall into that. So when you hear about LTE and 700 megabytes or LTE and 1900 megabytes, that's specific ranges, and then within that ranges, they have certain frequencies that they own the rights to. Like a radio has certain frequencies that they own the right to.
So I guess I'm just thinking in terms of, I have never heard of, how do we know the distance that it would be from the proposed daycare, that this tower would be?
That's a great question. I have to look that up. I should have that with me, so I will be able to look that up. I apologize.
And then I have a question for staff. If we have any type of, in our ordinance, minimum distance of something like a radio tower or this from a school or child care center?
Steve Josephson. Currently, we don't have anything in there, and that's one of the things that, as I said, we need to put something in our code. We're getting so many cell towers these days that we need to codify. We need to codify this. I have started working on something, on something to put into the code, and I hope to come back to you, within the next month or so or two with cell tower regulations for your discussion.
Because I would just think, I mean, I've never heard of a cell tower, sharing space with a school or child care center. I mean, it might be out there. I know some people have a concern, and I've looked for studies. I haven't found anything, that says definitively one way or the other, if that affects children, the waves from cell tower, radio tower. I mean, I know radio towers, they have signs up, stay a certain distance away. And I would just think that when that comes back to us, if they're going to develop the child care center there, that if we have some standards that then say it has to be this distance from the tower, that would affect where they can develop,
And if we did that, that would be more for safety, safety from the tower, from the height of the tower itself. From the height of the tower itself. So,
just a curious question. Have you heard anything in your planning experience about, what a recommended distance for in terms of the waves, not just the tower, but
the frequency, no, that's not addressed. I believe there's some FCC regulations that that it's more about the tower itself, the physical location of the tower. So I can't speak as an expert. I've heard different things about the frequencies, but there's nothing in the law that really addresses that. And I think there might be under the Federal Communications Act. I think that's something that local governments may not be able to even consider. But certainly with it being a certain number of distance from a child care and just to let you know, Commissioner Pierce, we've not seen any site plans for the child care yet. They've not come in for it. I have not seen any applications for building permit for the child care at this time.
If you don't mind, I'll give you a little bit of information, just food for thought. So when you're discussing safety and vicinity to an antenna, we test them on the ground, and we put them up on sawhorses, and we connect wires to them. You stand next to them and test them. So as an adult, it's safe enough to stand next to. There are microwaves, which are big round things that you see up on the taller towers, and when you're in a close vicinity in front of those do have a safety concern. I don't know the distance, and I got to wear a pretty cool spacesuit to test it, just to kind of see what it looked like. But this by no means would be a concern as far as current understanding of radio frequencies and vicinities to people, especially being 100 feet up. With our current understanding, there is no concern.
So are you saying you've done tests as far as your suit or whatever, just testing the waves that come from those dishes, how much you receive, or
Okay, so I worked for a construction company for a number of years, and with that construction company, they tested, worked on everything. So anywhere from an antenna to inside, outside, little ones that go up in your ceiling, the ones up on towers, everything. They also did microwaves. They did microwave hop, which is you line them up 2 to 2. And the really big ones did put out enough of and I'm not an expert on it, so I'm speaking off of my understanding, but they did put off enough of a power signal that it was recommended to wear, like I said, this kind of cool little spacesuit. And that was supposed to reduce the amount of exposure that you have to that. But again, that was very specific to very large, very high output, which there's low output and high output. So if you're out in the boondocks of Canada and you have a tower, or Boundary Waters is a great example in northern Minnesota, they microwave hop because they're not going to run wires through there because it would disrupt the Boundary Waters. So they microwave hop from tower to tower, and if it's a long distance, they have to up the power of the antenna, or sorry, the microwave, and that's the type of situation where I've ever heard of any type of concern. And again, we won't have that on this tower. Yeah, exactly. They're very focused. Focused to the point that they're literally at 16-foot antenna to 16-foot, 16-foot microwave, 16-foot microwave 5 miles away.
the microwaves, you can, if you want to get up there, you can, you know, cook your dinner, if you're in close proximity. But you have to be fairly close, but they can fry you.
I believe they're a little unsafe.
Yes, right. Any other comments or questions at this time? Thank you, Mr. Diamond. This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, I'm Jeremy Easton with Roars Development. Just to answer a couple clarifications for you. When the plat that came through probably a month or so ago replatted the area, it was talked about, it was rezoned, it was R3 that was rezoned to, which is allows for a tower use. As far as the daycare, that's just a proposal at this stage. There's, again, you've heard nothing's come before you. We've identified that as a potential use for that piece of property. And we are working with some folks to see if that could come to reality, but we're not prepared to say that that's a daycare right now. And we've may go different directions. So as far as the access, I think the reason it started 16 is that was actually the Hoff Farm Road before. We've relocated where that's coming in just so that it fits and it's shared, because we're working with the city with 15th and trying to limit the access off of 15th to not be so many at every lot. So that it was thought that a shared access would work, and the width is obviously out for negotiation at this point with Verizon or anybody. Our company fully supports the application, and we wanted to put that on the record as well. So,
Thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else from the public wish to make comment? Anyone else from the commission wish to make further comment? Mr. Millstone, would you like to make comment or recommendation on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Millstone, Interim Planning Director. I just want to first off say thanks to our engineering unit and Mr. Koupas for pointing out the roadway width. The only thing I'd like to say also is that while 24 is good, 26 or 28 is better, especially with that 90-degree turn in that bi-directional roadway. So we'd appreciate it being 26 or 28 if possible. Other than that, city staff recommends approval subject to the conditions as we've all heard before. And I'm available for any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Millstone? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the petition for special use permit for 110-foot monopole telecommunications tower, subject to conditions listed above.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Ballesteros. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommend approval. Thank you very much, Mr. Diamond. We'll take a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back to item number 5, which is... Okay, Jay, you're off the hook.